So the cop leaves and the kids fester over things for a while, eventually deciding to wait and see what happens. Marco and Jake returns to Jake's house to blow off some steam via video games, but Marco notices the changes in Tom's behavior, and when Tom asks him about the construction site incident, Marco realizes that Tom must be a controller. Mentioning this causes Jake to break out into a fistfight. The conflict is broken up by Tobias, who flies to Jake's house in the form of a red-tailed hawk. Jake asks Tobias to morph out, but Tobias is curiously hesitant. Finally, he morphs back, and Jake finds himself with a new Tobias. And you know, when you got a naked boy on your bed, that's always when your mother walks in, and you have to spend the rest of the day trying to explain that this was all part of a science experiment for school. And your mom will go, "You expect me to believe that? This is the 8th time." Yeah, that's always how it goes. Anyway, the reason Tobias was flying around was because he was looking for signs of something called a Yeerk pool, the Yeerk's secret hideout where they feed on alien nutrients called Cadrona rays every 3 days. How does Tobias know about this? Well, apparently right before they ran off, Elfangor, words with S's in them, gave him a super dose of information straight to the brain that Tobias has been trying to sort through. I guess he eventually quits because this information will never be mentioned again. More on that later. The kids decide they need to get more information in order to dodge the Yeerks, and so far their only lead are the repeated mentionings of The Shining. So they sign up for a meeting and all go out to the beach. Seems like a really fun place, with volleyball and BBQ ribs, and it's so great and inviting that even Marco changes his mind concerning Tom. Tom mentions that the sharing has an inner circle for more dedicated members, and goes off to have a meeting with them. Jake, still suspicious, morphs into Homer and does some spying. It doesn't take long for the sharing to show its true colors. It's a Yeerk-run organization that specializes in keeping tabs on local kids and making people volunteer to become controllers. The head of the group are the kids' vice principal, Chapman. Jake recognizes him from the construction site. The Yeerk pool is mentioned, and Tom says he'll have to head there soon for a recharge. Jake's spying then gets interrupted when the cop from earlier catches Cassie spying, but Cassie says he's just shell hunting and gets away. The next day, Jake plays hooky by ducking into his locker and morphing into a lizard he acquired the night before. After some hijinks involving losing his tail and giving in to the animal's instincts and eating a spider, Jake manages to follow Chapman into a utility closet where he opens a secret door into the Yeerk pool. Jake returns with his discovery, and the kids agree to sneak in that night to try and save Tom. Marco then comes up with the name Animorphs, stupid teenagers with a death wish. So they head to the Gardens, a theme park/zoo that Cassie's mom works at. Between this place and the barn, the Animorphs have pretty much any animal at their disposal. 'Cause who needs challenges in this morphing business, am I right? If you live in the Bay Area by chance, the Gardens is pretty much Marine World. Or at least until Six Flags bought it and phased out the zoo portion. Not sure what they did with the animals, but I like to imagine that old dancing fogey had them all ground down and served. Oh my god, my elephant ears are made of real elephants! The Animorphs slip into the back hallways behind the zoo portion to acquire some heavy artillery. Marco manages to acquire Gorilla before they're spotted by an elderly security guard. This leads into the Animorphs getting separated and having go-kart chases while Yakety Sax somehow plays even though this is a textual medium. Jake and Marco duck into a cage without checking what's in it and find themselves face to face with a Siberian tiger. Jake acquires it to put it into a trance, giving them enough time to escape. They catch up with the others, but none of them believe them about the tiger story. Because, compared to an infestation of mind-probing alien slugs, finding a tiger at a zoo is just ridiculous! The Animorphs go home to recollect themselves, and then head to the school to try and get into the Yeerk pool. However, Cassie has mysteriously disappeared. They finally find her in the hands of the cop from earlier, who escorts her into the Yeerk pool, and the kids pursue. And finally, we get a look at the Yeerk pool. And it's huge. Really, really huge. And when I say huge, I mean huge. They could have played the Super Bowl in there and had room left over for a couple of malls. It was like a giant bowl turned upside down, all carved out of solid rock. At the very top of the bowl was the faint outline of a hole. I thought I could see stars through it. Which would be impossible unless the Yeerks had all their lights turned off. Who knows, maybe the Yeerks have gone green. Yes, the Yeerk pool is huge. It's under half the city, it's got a spaceship port, and there's always someone giving a blood-curdling scream. And now the Animorphs realize just how royally screwed they are. These barely teenage kids could morph any animal they wanted. They'd still be vastly outnumbered, outsmarted, and outpowered.
Fighting these things would be like trying to stop a nuclear bomb with pillows. Their chance of doing damage to these guys are nil. The only option now is to stay alive the best they can. Some controllers spot Jake and Marco acting non-Yeerk-like and confront them. Rachel takes this opportunity to morph into an elephant and charges through the controllers. Jake and Marco morph Tiger and Gorilla and use Chaos to get to the central pool and save Cassie, Tom, and whoever else they can get. With a handful of freed prisoners, they make a dash for the exit, but are stopped by Visor 3. Unaware that they're human, Visor 3 calls them Andalite bandits, and then morphs into a freaky space dragon with 8 legs, 8 claws, and 8 fire-spitting heads. Clearly, only one man could stop such a beast. It's at this point that Tom makes the rather stupid decision to start punching aliens in the face, and gets recaptured. The Animorphs begin Plan B, run away! And just manage to get out of the Yeerk pool with their lives and secret identities intact. However, they only manage to save Cassie and a random woman they don't know. And to make matters worse, Tobias is missing. The Animorphs go home, and Tobias shows up at Jake's house. Unfortunately, Tobias has been in Hawkmorph for over 2 hours and is now stuck in it. Helpless and damaged, all the Animorphs can hope to do now is to stay alive and wait for the Andalite forces to arrive and win this war for them. Post-book follow-up. We have an ancient animal spirits, for Cassie giving a speech about tribal peoples summoning the strengths of various animals, which is a bit off topic considering the Animorphs were talking about how to sneak into the Yeerk pool. Marco rightfully blows her off and tells her to buy some Birkenstocks. When approaching the invasion for review, you have to decide whether to evaluate it on its own or within the context of the rest of the series. Actually, this is true for most of the books. It certainly fares better in the later than the former. On its own, the book gives us just enough to get the story rolling, but not much more. Reading it again after reading the rest of the series, one notices a lot of small details that would have been ignored in the first reading, but predict a lot of what's coming. For example, we get the first hints of Marco's ability at tactical analysis through the way he plays video games. As is the case for the rest of the series, the best part of this book is the character development. Interestingly, the least developed at this point is Jake, despite the fact that the book is narrated by him. He really is Joe Average in most ways. We get early hints of Rachel's aggressive streak, but at this point, we could write it off as typical 13-year-old Valley Girl bitchiness combined with a strong sense of woman on top uber feminism probably handed down from her mother. Marco and Tobias are the only 2 Animorphs whose family life we get a decent look at, and it puts them in an interesting parallel. Marco's mother was killed 2 years before this book, and this gives Marco a world wariness that he shouldn't have at this age. His trademark humor is most likely a coping mechanism to deal with these serious issues in his life, and he'll continue to try and act a clown as the Yeerk invasion gets more serious. Tobias, on the other hand, was abandoned by his parents and ended up being the ball in a ping-pong game between his aunt and his uncle. Tobias doesn't seem to be able to create the same kind of coping mechanism that Marco could, and ended up becoming a social misfit. When Tobias gets his morphing ability, he treats it like a toy. Despite being the most gung-ho about stopping the Yeerks, he's also the most unrealistic and immature about it, wanting to blow up the Yeerk pool that he doesn't even know what it really is. There's also some hints that Tobias wanted to be trapped in a Hawkmorph as a means to escape from the pains of the human world, brought by bullies and a dysfunctional family life. All in all, it paints Tobias as an unbalanced and troubled kid. I know Tobias fans are going to get mad at me for saying this, but if the whole Yeerk thing hadn't happened, I feel as though Tobias had a Columbine in him. Cassie didn't get much to do in this book besides offer some animals and act as the damsel in distress. However, the moment I mentioned earlier about her animal spirit speech gives an early hint to her unusual mindset. While the rest of the Animorphs are discussing tactics, Cassie goes off on a poetic but unrelated tangent. She sees things on a very different level than everyone else. When you really look at these guys, it's pretty clear to see why Jake was positioned as the team leader. He may have been Joe Average, but he was the only one of them that didn't have these huge emotional hang-ups, at least at first. So while the 5 main characters have a great start, the plotting doesn't fare quite as good this early in the game. The whole thing comes off as a stock comic book story. The Yeerks are portrayed as the ultimate in evil, and the Andalites the ultimate in good. Elfangor is seen as a warming, good presence, while Visor 3 comes off as a cackling, one-dimensional Doctor Doom kind of character with lots of gloating and whatever. Again, this stuff fares better in retrospective when we learn more about these characters and the conflict they're in. The writing itself is a bit condensed and rushed. Kay Applegate had to explain as much of the crucial details as she could in a limited amount of space, so many details got streamlined and the whole thing moves at a quickened pace. It's also clear that Kay hasn't gotten all the details figured out yet, and this book has the most of what the Animorphs fan community called Cassus, or Catherine Applegate screwed up. I already explained one with Tobias getting all that information in his head that it never comes up again. I've left most of the other ones out because they're not important. Between the atypical good versus evil plotting, a rushed pace, and a general disorder over the details, reading this book again was a bit of a disappointment, and it doesn't really hint at the dramatic directions the series would eventually take. I give Animorphs number 1, The Invasion, a 6 out of 10.